Hi, my name is Alessandro Gangelosi and that's a video tutorial coming from cgcookie.com for Max Cookie. Today we'll talk again about V-Ray, and this time we make an introduction to the global illumination and animation. You know that using global illumination is really nice because it can give us a really realistic way to simulate the lighting inside a scene. And it is perfect for exterior and interior rendering, and we have some tricks and tips to tweak the parameters to work, for example, with the interior. We worked in the past to the photoreal interior with V-Ray tutorial series, and you see that I'm using the scene, the latest version, so the part 9. But you can use the stuff we'll talk about in this tutorial for every kind of scene. This time we'll focus on interior rendering, and we'll make just an introduction to the global illumination problems in animation and some ways to solve it. So you know that a scene complex like this one can have some problems with global illumination, but we have to talk in general about global illumination and animation. You know that we have two different ways of animation. We have, for example, the walk-through animation. So I'm talking about just the camera moving in a scene. It can be an exterior or interior scene. So we have just the path movement of the camera with no animation for the object. And in other case we have the for example, the character animation or object animation, and in this way we can have the camera moving or the still camera, but we have the animated objects, and this kind of project needs a different approach. Today we'll talk about the walk-through, so the animation of the camera and the global illumination. Let's start preparing a simple animation inside the scene, and we have, for example, this camera, and we can move the camera there, you see. So at the beginning the camera will stay there. Let's select the camera target, and we move it to have it on the front. So the animation will be obviously really simple. It is just to understand how to work with the global illumination parameters. So the first thing I like to do is to pick the camera and change to no target, so we have just to animate the camera, and that's all. Let's call it animate or animated. So we know that this camera is the animated one. Let's go to save the project. So we are talking about the April 3ds Max rendering GI and or maybe GI animation introduction. Let's copy everything, and inside we can save the project. Nice. The animation will be really simple. We'll try to animate there and maybe have just the camera rotation. So let's have maybe maximum 150 frames. Auto key, and we'll start to animate. It is slow to move because the scene is really heavy. Let's say that we have until 85 to arrive there. And then 150 to rotate, but obviously then we fix the animation. Okay, so let's rotate more. Okay, so we see the entire room. and back there you see that we have the camera rotating, but I like to have no rotation until there. So let's go in the camera rotation. We need a little bit more space. Let's say that we add a key there, and there we have 90, and we can put 90 also there. So you see that we have a rotation. Okay, let's go to check the animation there, and let's say that this one is linear and this one is, let's say, 110. Back to the first frame. It is not important that the animation will be nice. It is just important to have the right possibility. Okay, so really simple. Okay, let's remove the auto key and we can see that's our animation. You see we have just movement, and let's close the animation there. And you know that the project there is complete. I like just to select all the objects to make a different group. Let's remove light and cameras and helpers. Then we can zoom there, and I pick most of the objects to remove it. So let's pick this part, and also this part, then this part too, and this part. Let's go to create a layer. We can create a layer, and let's call it objects and set to height. Let's go back to work at the default layer and close there. Let's go back to see the animation, and you see that now it's really simple and fast. Okay. Another thing we have to remember is to remove the displacement. Okay. And let's go to have a lower resolution, let's say 650, and for the moment we can have no anti-alias and really low quality level there for the sampling and the subdivision multiplier, and then we have to tweak the parameters there. Let's go for a really low value, and let's go for a really low value there too. You know, we prepared a really high quality configuration last time to render the scene, but this time we have to work with a different configuration. Let's try to render a frame. You see that it is preparing the light cache, and then it starts to render. If you see with a single frame, it seems that it is working nice. It seems that we have not so much problems, but obviously we have to see what happens when we are rendering a complete animation. So for example, now we can render some frames just to see what happens. Okay, to render the frame, we can, for the moment, let's go in the detail enhancement and we can remove it. We have the single frame mode there and the single frame mode there, so we are working as always, as we've done usually. And let's say that we render something more little, 450, and we try, let's say we try to render, for example, some frames, let's say in this way, and let's make a test render there inside 3ds Max, and let's call it GI animation.jpg. Okay, now I render some frames. Let's see how much speed it has. Okay, it seems not so much slow. Let's see after 1 frame or 2 frames to understand if it is going fine. Obviously, in this way, for every single frame, we have the calculation you see of the light cache and the irradiance map, so everything is calculated frame by frame. So we'll wait to have some frames and we'll see in play what happened. So you see we have 50 frames, so we can see what happened if we try to play the animation. Let's go to the GI frames. Okay, nice. Let's load it, and okay. So that's our animation. You see that the quality seems not bad, and we used really low value for the global illumination parameters. Let's see in play. Okay, you see we have the problems. As you see, we have flickering during the animation, and that's due because the global illumination solution we are calculating is calculated for every single frame, so it is adapted to works to have the best quality for the single frame, but it changes for every single frame, so we see the changing. There are different techniques to avoid this problem. In the case of the walkthrough animation, we can, for example, think about the light cache technique. Let's set to the single frame. Now we can go inside the indirect illumination to see what we have to work with the animation. You see that for the primary bounces we are using the radius map, and for the secondary bounces we are using the light cache. Obviously, if you are using the brute force, obviously you will have less flickering with some so big artifacts, but you know that brute force is really low, and you need really high parameters to avoid the flickering problems, because using the brute force, obviously you have not so big problems over the rendering, but you have grain. So to remove the grain, you have to use there a really high level for the subdivision, and obviously more bounces too to have the right illumination. And it will take a really high amount of time, and the brute force simulation is calculated for every single frame, so it is difficult to have nice and low rendering time with no grain. Let's go back to the light cache. The light cache has a really nice technique, and we can find it there. You know that we have the subdivision parameters to have a better quality, but we have also the mode. The mode can give us the possibility to work with the animation. So you see that we have single frame, and that means that we calculate the light cache for every single frame. Then we have the fly through, and that's the animation we are working on actually. So we are talking about the fly through animation, where just the camera is moving and we have no deforming objects or animated objects. So we can simulate the light cache for the entire animation just on a single frame, and we'll see later how it works. Then we have the from file to load a light cache solution we calculated before, and then we have also the progressive path tracing that is useful for animated objects, and we'll see in a future tutorial how to use it. So what we have to do is to use the fly through. The fly through obviously is useful for this kind of animation, and in this case we have to do something. We have to save the solution to be used later during the rendering. So to do something like that, we have to work on the on render end panel. You see that we have on render end don't delete, so we'll don't erase the data we just calculated. So now we have to say that at the end of the animation we don't like to erase the stuff we just calculated for the light cache, and we have to say that we like to save the solution, so we have to click over autosave, and we have to browse the name. Let's say that we save in the in a folder, let's say room LC for light cache, and then we can automatize the usage of the light cache saved before just using the switch to saved cache. In this case, automatically it will use this one, and we'll see how it will use it. So now we can, for example, do something like that, but we need to no render the final image during this kind of calculation. So what we can do is to work just on the light cache, but obviously it needs to calculate also the radius map. And what we can do to work on the radius map, we have to do something really similar. So you see that inside the radius map we have again mode, and we have single frame, or we have different ways. You see that we have a lot of modality, but this time the one I like to use is the incremental add to current map. So this way is really nice because it will create a map for the first frame with all the data needed for the frame, and then it will add just the changing data for every single frame, adding more information to the map we are saving. So we have less calculation, and it is faster, so it is really nice. We have to do the same for on the render end, so we have to say don't delete, autosave, and we save on the array on the same place, and we call it room irradiance. Okay, and then we say to switch to the saved map to use this one at the end. If we launch this render, we have a problem because actually it will start calculating the stuff, but it will render also the frames, and it will take a lot of time. So we have to use in the V-Ray and then global switches this option in the indirect illumination. You see that we have don't render final image. In this way it will render the GI, but it will render no final image, and that's really useful. So let's try to do the same. We can start rendering, and let's see what happened. So render, obviously it is saying that we are rendering a sequence, an animation, but we are not saving files. Obviously it is right for us, so we can say yes, continue. So you see it is calculating a light cache, and it's calculated the light cache just for the first frame. Now it is calculating the irradiance map for every single frame, and you see that it's really faster than previous, because it is adding just the information changing for every single frame. So you see it is really fast, and you know you are using less time to render, so it is obviously really useful to use this technique to render animation, because we have just a part of the simulation for the global illumination and we are not losing so much time for the entire animation. You know that previously we rendered just 50 frames, so we can stimulate 50 frames for the GI, then we can click over cancel. Okay, now what happened inside the interactive illumination? You see that we didn't finish the rendering, so it has no possibility to switch automatically to the save it solution, so we have to do it manually. So in the irradiance map we have to say from file, and we can go to load the irradiance map we just saved. So you see now it is using this file, and you see that there is all the information saved in this map. We have to do the same for the light cache, so there we have to click over from file, browse, and we can select the room light cache. Okay, now we have to remember to go inside the V-Ray global switches and set to after don't render final image, because now we have to render final images. Then we have to say until the number 50, and we have to save the file, render, that's save. Obviously you see that it's just rendering the final image, so there is no more calculation for the global illumination because we pre-calculated everything before. So let's wait for this frame just to see how it works and to see how we can tweak and optimize the calculation. So let's check the rendering. So we can load in the run player again. Let's go to the right frames. Okay, open, and let's see the result. Let's go and play, and you see that the solution is really stable. We have a little bit of grain all around, but it is due to the anti-alias configuration. For all the other stuff, everything is working fine. So you see that for the fly through and the camera animation, that's the perfect solution. We can obviously optimize more this kind of situation. So let's close there, because you know we have just calculated for all the frames the solution, but maybe we can use another way to solve it. So the global illumination, when it is saved as an incremental, has all the information for all the frames, you know, because we are simulating all the frames. But we can speed up the calculation using less frames. So now we see an example. We have these 50 frames, and this time we say that we render every 3 frames. We go obviously to remove there, and we say don't render final image, and there we have to say to save on another file. So incremental add to current map, and we call it B. And we do the same for the light cache. So fly through, browse, and we call it B. Now we can render it, but obviously this time we render less frames because we are rendering every 3 frames. So let's go to render, and you see that it started. We have we done the light cache, and you see that now it is faster than before because we are calculating just some frames. So it is really amazing, really fast. Now we can do the rendering. So we say to render all the frames, and we say back to save the file. We remove the don't render. We go there, and you see that this time it is finished. So it is able to automatically switch to from file and select the file, and it has done the same for the from file mode there for the gradients. So now we can render, and we can go there launch the render. Yes, overwrite, and you see that it is just rendering, and this time it is picking the information for the global illumination from the cache we saved. So we have less space for the cache because we used less frames and less time to render, so a general speed up to the global illumination calculation. Now we wait for all the frames and then we see how it works in play. So let's check the animation this time. You know that we calculated really less frames. Let's go to the right frame we have to open. Okay, and load and play, and you see that it works perfectly. So you see that we have less information saved, less time spent to calculate the global illumination, but the solution is enough to be used on all the other frames because there is the internal algorithm that will works to create a blending between all the information for every single frame. So that's a way to accelerate and have a right and perfectly working global illumination. So at the end, if you like to render something like that, you have just to, let's go to single, then okay. You have just to use the final quality. So in this case, for example, we can go to -3, -1 with the detail enhancement, and we can say to do the incremental, and we say as the C, and we use there, for example, let's say 1600, and we say to fly through, browse, and we'll save it as the C. And this time we make the all the stuff really more complex. Let's say don't render final image. Let's go again there, and let's say every 3 frames, but this time we'll use all the layers to see if it is able to work with a more complex solution. So let's go to render, say yes, it is loading all the object this time, and you see that the light cache is a little bit slower because we have more quality and it is using all the object this time. And then we'll see how it takes to calculate the irradiance map. So you see it's ready, and then it is starting to prepare the irradiance map, and you see that it's still really fast. Before we had just 1 second by frame, this time we have 2 seconds or max 3 seconds sometimes, but it's really fast. So it is ready. Now we are able to calculate the final image. We have to say to render the final frames, every single frame, to save the animation. We can use the anti-alias, and we can go, for example, to 16 and 2 just to have a little bit more quality. Let's see if there we have the right switching. Yes, from file and from file. So we are ready and we can start rendering. Let's say yes to overwrite. The rendering will be a little bit slower because the frames are more complex, but you see that it is not so much. We can wait to add some frames, so we'll see if the result is stable enough. If it will be not so much stable, obviously we can talk about how to optimize it to receive and obtain a better result. Okay, let's check the final result in the RAM player. So let's load the right file. Okay, and let's go and play, and you see that it is stable as before. we have just a little bit of grain, and that's due still to the quality we are using for the anti-alias and the DMC sampler, because in the final version of the scene last time we used there 64 and 4, if I remember really well. So you have just to take care about the grain there for the anti-alias flickering. So you see, it's really simple to manage fly through, and you have just to play with the light cache and the irradiance technique to save and to process, and we saw also how to optimize the rendering time using just some frames from the complete sequence to speed up the rendering. So for the moment that's all, and I hope to see you back on Max Cookie to check for new tutorial coming from cgcookie.com. Bye!